Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Reva Ramadorai. I'm the director of the Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovators Challenge. I'm here with my colleague Nora Kelly and also our special guest teacher, John Wiley, who's going to talk a little bit later about his experience as a teacher for the Thermo Fisher JIC, as a teacher for nominees, and helping them get through the process. So with that, we're going to jump right into things today. We're going to talk about um, just give you an overview of the competition. We know there's a mix of teachers here, some that are not familiar at all with the Thermo Fisher JIC, some that have had some students apply in the past, but not all, and some that are veterans and just here to kind of hear another year's worth of experience. So we're going to start with the basics, talking about over an overview of the competition. I'm going to go into some notes on rules and eligibility. We're going to look at the application just in screenshots, but I'll talk through those tasks and then you'll hear from John and his tips and share some tips that we have as well. So Nora, if you can go ahead and share screens, we'll get started. And if you want to pop in the chat where you're from, your experience level with Thermo Fisher JIC, and you can start asking questions as well for either myself or Nora or John to answer at the end of our slides. Not quite seeing the slides yet, though. Awesome. There we go. Nora, actually, if you go back and you want to do the reading pane view, that might be a little bit easier because for this, I think you'll see like notes and everything. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. All right, next slide. So, what is the Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovators Challenge? It is the premier national STEM research competition for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students in the United States. You might be familiar with our former name, the Broadcom Masters. Broadcom Foundation was the sponsor of this competition from 2011 through 2022. Before that, we were known as the Discovery Channel Young Scientist Challenge. That started in 1999, so not quite as old as some of the other competitions we have here at the Society for Science. If you're familiar with the Regeneron Science Talent Search, the nation's oldest science and math competition in the United States, and of course the Regeneron ISEF, but we still have a history. To qualify for the competition, students must first place within the top 10% of a society-affiliated science fair. So if you have a nominated student, they've already completed that step. And ultimately, after going through the application and the judging and evaluation process for those applications, finalists, the top 30 finalists, are invited to spend a week in Washington, D.C., both showcasing their research project and also participating in hands-on team challenges. So the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about just who we are. The Society for Science, like I mentioned, is the nonprofit that hosts Thermo Fisher JIC. It's the organization that Nora and I work for. Our vision is to promote the understanding and appreciation of science and the vital role it plays in human advancement. Our motto is to inform, educate, and inspire. So really just trying to get scientific research in the hands of the general public, and particularly in your hands as educators and students as well. So we have our scientific publications, Science News and Science News Explorers for our younger audience, and our competitions. And of course, our generous sponsors, Thermo Fisher Scientific, have been backing us since 2023, and they're committed to spreading STEM and doing outreach in that realm as well. Go to the next slide, Nora. So steps to the competition. First, foremost, complete a research project. All your students have already done that, so check that off. Next, compete in a Society for Science affiliated fair. That is also done. Receive a nomination by placing within the top 10% of fairs. Fairs can choose their top 10% in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's the category first place winners across all categories in a fair. It really depends on the size of the fair. But earning a nomination means that that student is in the top 10% of really sixth through eighth grade students across the country, which is a huge feat. Um, Once they're nominated, the step to officially enter the competition is completing that online application. Our deadline this year is June 11th. From there, students can qualify to be one of the top 300 junior innovators. So you can think of that as our semifinalist kind of stage. And then ultimately, from that pool, 30 finalists are selected to compete in finals week. This year, that competition finals week is October 24th through the 29th here in DC. I have a link there for the application. You should have already had that in the email, and your students should have that as well. Um, and I just want to point out that there are no additional steps to the application or that your students have to complete between submitting their application, being selected as one of the top 300, or being selected as a finalist. Their application is their full materials that they are evaluated on to make it to each of those subsequent levels. Next slide, North. A little bit more about each of these stages and kind of what they mean for your students. I want to highlight that, our motto here is, especially at the middle school level, we want to encourage these students to continue their passions for STEM. We want to foster that motivation, that excitement that they already have just by entering their science fair and, placing in that top 10%. So everything that we do, though it's a competition, we try to be really just encouraging of those students and make sure that that spark continues beyond just their middle school level. So that at that base level, the nominees they should receive a certificate from their fair. We send packets of information to the fair to distribute to their nominees as well. That tells them and their families a little bit more about the competition, what it entails to apply, and all that is available to them once they do. From there, once they become an entrant, again, entrants have to complete the online application and submit it by the deadline. Once that happens, we send a prize package to all entrants over the summer. They get a certificate or a letter of achievement, a t-shirt, and they get placed into drawings for more prizes as well. The top 300 junior innovators, those will be announced on September 3rd this year. Thanks to our partnership with DoD STEM and the Society for Science being a member of the DoD STEM Education Consortium, all top 300 students will receive $125. They also receive a special prize package, and teachers of the top 300 receive prizes as well. So teachers will receive a grocery tote bag and a subscription to Science News Explorers magazine. So that is a great resource to kind of bring research again to the forefront of your classes, have that be something that you can share with your students as well. Ultimately, the top 30 finalists are invited to DC. Each finalist gets $500 to further their STEM initiatives and education, and each finalist school receives $1,000 as well. And that those funds are specifically to be used on STEM initiatives at the school. So equipment, funds for science fair clubs, anything that can kind of further more students getting involved in research and entering competition at your school. So from there, talking a little bit more about what it means to be a finalist, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, going on the Society for Science YouTube channel and watching our highlights video. That's really the best picture, gives you the best picture for what finals week is all about. Those finalists this year are going to be announced on September 17th. And really the bulk of finals week and judging for finals week is actually about the team challenges. I'm going to talk a little bit more about judging in the next slide. But it's a really unique opportunity for students. These students have done obviously science fair, and have more experience, about their specific projects and their specific interests in science and in STEM. But these team challenges are designed so that each All 30 students are placed into 6 teams of 5, and they have a mix of disciplines on their team. We design different activities in the different, buckets of STEM so that students are kind of exposed to something that might be a little bit out of their comfort zone. But the goal there is, to make students aware of other areas that they might not have interest in yet, but that could spark some interest. And is really to foster collaboration, because one of our main goals is um, bringing across the message that science is not a solitary endeavor, and that working together, having those communication skills, being a team player is something that's going to be really valuable for them, as they continue their academic careers. In addition to the judging components, they of course will present their research projects. We have a you know traditional science fair kind of setup where they do project judging and have interviews with our panel of judges. They, beyond judging, do fun activities throughout the week. It's really a chance for uh, these students to meet other students just like them around the country. And a lot of students, depending on where they are, might not have had that experience in their schools or their local communities. So most of our students, walk away saying they didn't even feel like it was a competition in the moment of it, right? In the week. It's a really great experience for them to just meet other like-minded students and gain a unique experience throughout the week. So they connect with alumni. We take them around the city. We'll do monument tours, escape rooms, and other things. So hopefully they walk away with new friends for life. Next slide. So a little bit more about that evaluation and judging piece, just to clarify some things. We don't share our judging rubric, but I do want to take a minute to just highlight, the differences in terms of what students are judged on from the start to the end of the competition, and hopefully this graphic kind of illustrates that. Um, the goal of the competition is to assess, 21st century skills. And we kind of say that from competing at their local fair to the end, to finals week, um, the research project is emphasized less and less. So the research obviously gets them in, it gets them the nomination. They go online, the application, the bulk of it is about the research project. But if you've seen it already or your students have seen it already, it does go beyond the research project a little bit. There is a essay section where the students are asked a little bit to explain about themselves. There's a solve a problem. We'll talk about that soon. But really, the application's then looking at, their enthusiasm for science, their passion, a little bit of those critical thinking skills in that solve a problem essay that I mentioned. And then you take it further to the finals week of the competition. Really, those team challenges take up 2 days of judging. So there's 3 days total, and the bulk of that time is spent on those team challenges. Again, looking at skills like collaboration, looking at their overall breadth of STEM knowledge, their teamwork, but also their leadership skills and how they conduct themselves in those challenges. So again, we're covering a variety of topics at finals week. We always say that it's okay if they don't have a lot of background experience in, the challenges that they'll come across, or even in the essay that we ask about in the application. Um, a lot of what the judges are looking for and evaluators are looking for, even when they're reading the applications, is can they get a sense of the student's problem solving? Can they get a sense of how a student might approach a problem that they don't know a lot about. So thinking through uh, the essay question and showing that thought process is almost as important as, what the final answer is. Um, so yeah, and again, just emphasizing that collaboration is a huge part of scientific research, and we want to make sure that we send that message across from an early age. Go to the next one now. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but these are all of the different prizes and awards. We more than half the students walk away with a prize at the finals level of this competition. Again, we just want to be super encouraging um, to all students that make it here. One note that I'll say that is relevant for teachers that might have had students apply in the past. You can be a finalist in the competition and still earn a nomination again and apply as long as you haven't won a top award or a STEM award. So we have different top awards that are sponsored by various partners that we have, and we have 8 overall STEM awards. We have a first and second place in each of those. If a student wins one of those prizes, they are not eligible to compete again. However, if they win the team award, they are still eligible to compete. And again, the rule for that, or the reasoning behind that, is really just to spread the wealth as much as we can, spread the love, give this opportunity to as many students as possible. All right, so now we're going to dive into the eligibility rules and science fair paperwork a little bit. Um, Most of this is kind of background knowledge. Again, your students have been nominated and your fairs have our eligibility criteria. So hopefully they've nominated students that already meet this criteria. I do want to clarify that team projects are okay. We often get a lot of questions from students about that. Team projects can have a maximum of 3 students. And each team member is evaluated independently. So that means that every student in a team project needs to complete their own application. We've talked about, the judging process a little bit already. So really, the reasoning behind this is that each student, they're looked at beyond just their research project. So that's why, they have to complete individual applications. And again, will be judged independently once they make it to finals week of the competition as well. That being said, not all team members that earn a nomination need to apply. So it's okay if only one student in a 3-person team wants to apply and their teammates don't. There's no rule against that. Um, a student should also enter the same project that earned them the nomination. I'm going to talk about that on the next slide a little bit more. Maximum of 1 year's research is allowed. So continuation projects are okay as long as they've changed something about their research. And the application will ask them to talk about that a little bit more as well. And we've already covered the rule about finalists. So elaborating on this rule that students have to enter with the same project that earned them the nomination, we got a lot of questions about this as well. Um, Basically, no new variables should be tested, no new surveys or questionnaires. If your student has done a engineering project, um, there shouldn't be any significant modifications to the prototypes or applications that they've built. The only thing that they can do is collect more data. So again, keeping the same methodology, keeping the same variables, the same prototypes. Um, if they just want to conduct more trials of whatever they've already done and presented at their fair, they can do that. Primarily, reasoning behind this rule is we want to make sure that they are continuing to be safe and following the rules that we have in place. We'll talk about science fair paperwork in just a second, but um, we want to make sure that students are doing the approved research that's already been looked at by their local science fair. All right, sorry, I've copied some of those extra bullets there. Rules for research. So talking a little bit more specifically about the science fair paperwork that we have students use. Our goal here again is to prioritize student safety and ethical behavior. All of the middle school affiliated fairs should follow Regeneron ISEF rules. So that means, they would have had certain projects go through pre-approvals. There should be a scientific review committee at the fair that's looking at projects. Um, we'll talk about specifically what projects require that pre-approval. At this level, your students should have already done all of that paperwork, and what we're going to ask for in the application is just to see whatever they submitted to the fair. You can see our full ISAF rules and guidelines via this link here. Highly recommend looking at that for the future as well, and particularly before you go into the school year with your students before they start their research project, just to get yourself familiar with the rules a little bit if you are new. Next slide. So human participants, I'm going to talk about just a few buckets that we want to call attention to that always kind of um, that we want to make sure students are following the rules. Um, a little bit more closely. Human participants is a big one. Research involving human participants typically does require that pre-approval and review process. Anything that involves student-designed surveys, testing of inventions or prototypes, testing using anyone other than the researcher, all of those kind of fall under human use studies. So a few things to call out. If a student has designed a survey, we'll ask for that, for a copy of that in the application. Um, Typically, this means that a student would have had to have IRB approval. That might sound a little complicated if you're not familiar with it, but we do have a guide on our website as well for setting up a simple school level IRB. Definitely check in with your school administration. Districts might have their own rules about IRBs and how to set that up and what your students have to do. But at the base level, for us, what's acceptable is an educator signing off on it, so a science teacher, school administrator, that's your principal, vice principal, and a medical or mental health professional, so school nurse, anyone with kind of expertise in the study that your students are doing. Exempt studies, anything that is de-identified, publicly available data, all of that doesn't have to go through this review process. Same with behavioral observational studies where the student is not doing anything to alter the environment, alter their participants in any way. Vertebrate animals also, we want to make sure we're keeping pets safe. We know a lot of middle school level students also, might be interested in testing what, dog food their dog likes best. But we want to make sure any of those studies do get some review beforehand. Um, Anything with potentially hazardous biological agents as well. I'll just make the quick note here to say that culturing at home is not allowed. We definitely don't want to be doing that. Um, most experiments involving potentially hazardous biological agents need at least a BSL-1. That's typically a school lab. Um, but just highlighting that little caveat there. I'll share the link to this at the end of the webinar as well, but we have a science fair paperwork guide for educators on our website as well that kind of highlights all of this information. Again, just to look out for, particularly as you're starting the school year with your students and getting them started out on their research projects. I hope that should be a good resource to have. So a little bit more about paperwork in the application. I just want to call out that fairs can use their own own equivalent ISEF forms. They don't have to be necessarily the full ISEF paperwork. Um, that's fine. At this level in the application, what we want is whatever forms that they completed and submitted to their local fair, to your school fair. They shouldn't be going and completing new paperwork at this stage. If the student for some reason doesn't have access to the forms, their fair didn't require it, all is not lost. There is an option to submit a letter for your student. So we really want this to be from an adult that kind of supervised them or at least had some supervision over their project. You can submit a letter for your student to say what approvals they went through, what safety precautions were taken as they completed their research. Just to describe, that there was an adult that kind of okayed the project and looked it over and can vouch for the safety that the student had during their research project. Right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the application. I'm not going to go through in depth today, but in a future office hours series, we'll pull up the application and talk through it together. The main sections here are just outlined for you to take a look at. On our website as well, we have a PDF of the application, so you can look through all of the questions there. You're also more than welcome to complete to open a test account on SurveyMonkey Apply as well, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that might be helpful for you to take a look at um, uh, to help you kind of guide your students through the application. All of these tasks are required. Um, and we'll go to the next slide and start talking a little bit about each of these different steps. Our top tip is always to make sure your students have their fair password. If you've been getting emails from us about your student's application status, those emails have their fair password in them. It's typically something that the fairs should also email their students right away when they earn the nomination. Doesn't always happen, so we try to give that up front. But you or your students can always email us at jic@societyforscience.org if you don't have this. It's going to be one of the first tasks that they encounter once they open the application, and getting that password in will give them access to the rest of it. If they don't have the right fair password, it'll stop them and encourage them to email us to get that key. And again, this is just so that we can make sure that only nominated students are applying. If you want to create a test account, you can use your student's fair password and open an account. That's totally fine. Next slide. So applications parts 1 and 2, this is just registration, background information for your student, contact information so that we can have an adult's email address to let them know the status of their student's application and to inform them if they make it as a top 300 junior innovator or finalist. There's a few questions here about, how they conducted research. All of this is just kind of general information that we will use if they move further. Our communications team likes to tell the stories of these students, so these questions are kind of used in that way. It doesn't have a lot of weight on the application itself. Same with part 5, you'll see it has a lot of extracurriculars and that kind of thing. Again, just to kind of give a whole picture of a student beyond the research project. And next slide, Nora. Part 3 is the project information. So that's going to be the bulk of the student's application. A few things here. We try to structure this in a broken down way so that if a student, has already done their project presentation, has answered questions from the judges, this will mimic that flow a little bit. We recommend that students answer these questions out loud if they're getting stuck writing it down in the application itself. That kind of can help ideas flowing. A few things to call out. We ask about who's helped them. Scientific integrity is a big part of our application. We know at the middle school level, it's okay to have help. It's okay for our teachers to talk about, or it's okay for the student to talk about how their teacher might have helped guide them in project selection or help them with certain, methods or using special equipment if they went to a lab. We want the students to really be honest about that work. This project is still their own, can still be their idea, but it's important to acknowledge that within the application. I will say for the visual aid, we get a lot of questions about that. The rules that we have there are really the best guide to follow. When we say recommended, it really is recommended. There's only a few things that in the rules that students cannot put in their visual aid. That includes any links to additional materials, photographs of individuals, any links to videos. We highly encourage them to not use a photo of a project board. The visual aid should really be their best figures, graphs, data, whatever best represents their projects should go in that visual aid. And we recommend about 3 visuals per page for those 2 pages, just so that information is not crammed in there. Next slide, Nora. Creative essays, again, so this is that part that goes kind of beyond the application or the project a little bit. We ask about a student's STEM story. This is kind of like a personal essay, but a personal statement, a light version of it, really just gives the judges and evaluators a chance to look at the students, and get a sense of their passion and their, background in STEM. Solve a problem. This is where students might have to do a little bit of research. But again, what we want to see is how the students might approach a problem that they don't know a lot about. It's okay to ask for some guidance here from, a teacher or adult that's mentoring them. Um, but again, overall, the application should really be in their own words. We have an optional essay question here as well. Any optional questions within the application are truly optional. The guidance we give is, if a student feels forced to write it, it's probably best that they don't and they leave that blank. But that this essay is there in case there's anything additional that they feel, their application would not be complete without talking about. Go to the next one, Nora. We talked about science-free paperwork already, so I'm not going to cover that much here. Again, personal interests and extracurriculars. This is primarily used by our communications team if a student makes it beyond to that finalist level. And we'll use that in media stories and just creating a bio for a student. Go to the next slide. We have some resources on our YouTube page. Highly recommend checking those out. We have webinars specifically for nominated students where we're sharing advice, where alumni share advice. And I think those are really helpful just to hear from students that were in their shoes. We can talk about how easy the application is and how worth it is to apply. Um, and go on and on about that, but it's always more helpful, I think, to hear it straight from students themselves. Some quick tips here before I pass it over to John. We encourage them, if they haven't already opened the application, to do so now. That just helps give them a picture of what the application, all the different tasks, how long it might take them. So definitely highly recommend starting early. Um, Parts 1, 2, and 5 are typically pretty quick to go through. Again, that's like easy registration information, checking off what hobbies they do. And then that's a good amount of the application already done. If a student wants to submit their application um, before the deadline, obviously that's great. They can always edit after they submit as well. So we recommend if you're like 95% of the way there, just doing some proofreading, final tweaks, go ahead and submit if everything is already complete. That way you know that we have it, and you can still edit up until the deadline. Answers in their own words, we talked about that already. Talking out loud is a great way to start if your student is stuck. There are word limits on the application. So sometimes it's helpful to write it in a Google Doc first or Word. That way you save it, you can look exactly at the word counts, and then go ahead and copy and paste it back into the application. We have a planner that we send out in that digital nominee packet that we hope is helpful for students to um, utilize, to just plan out their how they're going to tackle the application, something that you as teachers can also help with, making sure they utilize that. And then celebrate entering. Again, this is a huge accomplishment, just being nominated. It's a huge accomplishment finishing this application. We know it's a big task. It's often the first kind of big application that a lot of students are dealing with, or but if they hope to continue, with scientific research, with college applications, the first trial run, so to speak. So we hope that they find it worthwhile. All right. And I think I already kind of talked a lot about all of these kind of summary of why your student should apply. Honestly, there's nothing to lose, right? So this is completely free to enter the competition. I don't think I've mentioned that before, but there's no charge at any step of the way. If a student makes it to the finals level of the competition, we pay for them and a parent or guardian to come to Washington, D.C. Um, it's a great way to practice those writing and communication skills. And they get a prize at the end of it. So at least there's a t-shirt waiting for them in the summer if they complete that application. So really hope your students apply. We are always here to answer more questions and help both you and your students. And with that, I will pass it on to John, who has had some nominees in the past, and can really speak from his expert experience as a teacher and being in these shoes and helping students cross that finish line to the application. John, hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, my name is John Wiley, and I teach at the Challenge School, which is a K-8 magnet school in Denver, Colorado. Um, I've been running science fairs in my building for 18 years, and this is my 26th year teaching. And I've run science fairs in every other school that I've been a part of. Um, I've probably had the best success in the last 12 to 15 years with getting kids entered into the Junior Innovation Challenge, whether it was Broadcom or now Thermo Fisher. And I've had a couple of kids make it all the way to the finalist stage and get the trip to DC to participate in the like the competition week or the teamwork week. So we can jump to the next slide. I think I just covered actually like the first two. That's a picture of me on a trip with students. One of my focuses is getting kids to do real science, whether that's in the field or in the lab. We can go to the next one. And since your students have been nominated, they like you've done 99% of the work. Really, at this stage, what I focus on with my students, especially now, it's May. Everybody is like screaming into the end of the school year, whether you are like, oh, I'm done in 4 weeks, not that anybody's counting. And some people are going to be done a little bit later or a little bit earlier. But usually there's a bit of a letdown after the first round of competitions where, you know, they've worked really hard, whether they if they get nominated and they succeeded and maybe they even made it to the state level competition, but then they're kind of done with it for a while. So I usually let everybody cool down a little bit, and then my students that have gotten nominations, I start checking in with them and just touching base and maybe emailing home to say, look at what a cool opportunity you have. I know the deadline looks like it's really far away, but why don't we start it now so that you can get your application done before the end of the school year. When I do communicate with parents, linking to the website is really helpful so that they can see what their student has an opportunity to get involved with. You can go ahead and hit the next slide. The biggest roadblock that I've really ever experienced, because there's lots of roadblocks to doing science fair, but at this stage they've done it and they're in the top 10%. So the biggest roadblock is that end of year burnout or just being done. So as a teacher, I need to kind of get psyched up and get re-excited about science fair. My students are kind of already looking at the end, especially my 8th graders. They're like ready for high school. They think they're done with middle school, and so I get to like remind them that there's still a little bit more of middle school. And I've had a couple kids make it to the finals round, and they were freshmen in high school when they went. I like checked in with them after they got back, and they loved every minute of their experience. So the other success part that I wanted to highlight was that I've had a few successes with kids making it to the round of 300 or the round of 30, but I have probably had 10 times more students not make those final cuts, and they gain so much in the process of telling their story, of writing about their research, of thinking how to communicate their project in a slightly different way because it's a slightly different format. I'm always impressed with the kids that make that extra step, regardless of how they sort of finish. They're just way better scholastically, and they're way more motivated. Again, regardless of like whether or not they made the 300 or the 30. And I think that validated and successful thing is pretty important. If you've been teaching through COVID, you already know that the affective side of things has been kind of a nightmare to work through. And I'm revitalized in my engagement with science every time I get to work with this competition, because of the awesome like transformation it has in kids' affect. So it really doesn't matter who I'm working with. My students that engage in the process are so much more confident. They feel so much more capable. They say every one of those, like, I'm good at science. I can complete a huge project. I deserve to be in the competition. Like their sense of competence and confidence goes through the roof. And um, especially for my students that are going on to high school, I know that they're going to face daunting challenges. A lot of them are going to be taking advanced level science classes, and they're going to face a really high workload. And I know that they're prepared for it after doing the level of work that we've been working on. So I've had really great connections with kids that have come back after high school and after college, and they work in STEM fields, and they are professional scientists, and it really can start in like 6th or 7th grade. Um, and then and then I've been a part of the Junior Innovation Challenge, but I've also been a part of the Society for Science Advocate program. So I think that those two things tie in really closely together. And I know that this webinar isn't necessarily for that, but I think that um, getting like all of our students access to these opportunities is super important. Really, what I'm focused on after they've done all the hard work is like helping them with the paperwork, making time for them, or finding ways. I've literally excused kids from a homework assignment because they've told me they're working on their Junior Innovation Challenge. So that's like a no-brainer for me, where they can feel like, oh, I don't have to do this worksheet on chemistry because I'm going to be completing this application. Uh, Little things like that can be, I think, huge motivators, um, and then again, that makes our job so much better. So I'm open to taking any questions, or we can just talk about what it's like for kids once they start completing the applications.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. We'll take some questions and would love to, yeah, just hear your experience with or your students' experience as they've gone through the application process. One question I have is, for students that you might have encountered, right, that particularly don't see themselves going all the way to the top, and may not feel that motivation to apply and to really just get their foot in the door. Do you have, words of wisdom for those students, for teachers who might have students in that same kind of mindset? Because I feel like those students, you want to get them in it,
Yeah.
even more so than the students that are already like gung ho for it.
Yeah, that's my favorite, is like the reluctant scientist that's got like great ideas, but just maybe not have maybe doesn't have the confidence. We we work so hard on building relationships with our kids, and that's a big part of like what teachers do every day, all day. I think that especially when I first started learning about and participating in this competition and ISEF affiliated fairs, it's sort of that like showing kids that I'm going to work through this with you, and that this paperwork can seem daunting, but it really is just a process of chipping away at it. And that there's going to be things you might not understand, but you're still 100% worthy of like being in this event and taking part in this competition, even if we have to talk through how to do the application process. And it really is laid out really nicely. I mean, if you've gone through the work of filling out ISEF affiliated fair paperwork for human subjects or working with microorganisms, then that stuff is way harder than anything the Junior Innovation Challenge is going to throw at you. So, but like that side by side process, I think is really cool with kids, where they, instead of just like the lecture or me telling them because I already know it, I try to just take that like we're going to do this together approach, um, and finding time to do that. I mean, sometimes it's lunches, sometimes it's like a study hall and what we have for homeroom. Finding those moments with those kids is kind of the motivator, because they also feel special when they get that directed, focused, one-on-one attention with a teacher. Like we're taking extra time that feels special, and time is the scarcest commodity that educators have. So when we are working with kids, and this is what we're working on. That's awesome for me too. Like I'd much rather do this than grade the papers that are still stacked on my desk.
Yeah, totally understandable. Uh, Kind of going off that, I mean, you've already spoken to it a little bit, but how do you find the motivation to put in all the work and time, right? Like, because it is an extra thing on your plate, and I know that sometimes for teachers and particularly new teachers that, are just kind of hearing about the competition or having their students go into science fair and doing projects. I know that that's been really tough post-COVID for teachers to want to take on more. And we know that this is an additional thing, but what would you say to those teachers that are kind of struggling to find the fire for themselves?
That's a really good question because I don't always know where I
Yeah.
find the energy, but I mean, but really when what's the I was just listening to like some motivational thing where they were telling you that like wanting to do something is not the right way to try to approach it. Like I want to go exercise or whatever, like or I want to eat healthier. It's more like um, knowing that doing the thing is going to feel much better after you get through it. So like I don't want to go exercise, but I know that when I do it, I'm going to feel better after I'm done. I also know that with all the time pulls that we have in all the different directions that we have them, um, this time is never wasted. So when I can budget it and find the time and find the students' time, um, we all know what it's like to sit through a meeting that could have been an email and like, oh my God, that was a half hour. I'm never getting back. I've never, ever, ever thought that with an entry to any of the Society for Science competitions. It always like pays off in my own affect. Like, we talk about the kids' affect. I'm practically a middle schooler. Like I need that affective plug in. And I'm also not going to lie, like the validation for me of like, oh my God, my kid made the 300. And I, like the tote bag, sure, that's really cool. But my kid made the 300 is a huge like bragging rights. I send emails. There's a lot of, and people are just like, what is he talking about? But like it's a big deal in my school or I make it a big deal when a kid makes even
Yeah.
that level. Because for most of the years, it's usually like somewhere around 3,000 applicants or maybe 2,000
Yeah,
down to 300. That's huge. That's
it
huge
is.
just to get nominated, but it's huge to make it to that level.
Absolutely. No, I'm glad to hear you say that too, because you deserve those bragging rights. It is a big deal, and particularly, for teachers, we know how much time you're devoting to those students from the beginning of the school year, let alone, the nomination and application process. So it is a really great thing to have, and we hope to be able to do more, for in terms of recognition for teachers. It's something that's always on our goals list. At the finalist level, students get their schools get a plaque because we want it to kind of be almost like as invigorating as um, looked up to as some of these like sports competitions, right? Or sports obviously I'm a STEM kid here, but having a trophy case to kind of highlight the achievements that these kids are doing is what we want to accomplish really with the program and get other students just as excited and other teachers just as excited to say, hey, this is actually worth it. There's so much on the line here that these students can learn and accomplish. So yeah, that's
I'll
our goal.
speak to that too because once I have like one kid that has done well, then I try to propagate that. Like we all tell that student story the year after and the year after, and it's one thing to when I show kids like a website or I show them an award ceremony or like a list of the prizes. Like there's that external motivation, but which can be really important for middle school kids to sort of like go after something. But telling the personal stories of a student that's completed the process is motivating and kind of sparks because they know that student like that. They're like, oh, I mean, just a year younger than that person, and I saw them do their science fair project at this school, and now, like, they made it to that level. It's very, it's so much more relatable, and I feel like once I got those first 2 or 3 nominations in, it's sort of, like I said, propagated every single year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely, yeah, see that across the board, those alumni stories and hearing it directly from students, like I said, that have been in their shoes a year or 2 or 3 years prior, really makes a difference. And that's why we try to tap into our alumni base a lot to share that message. We encourage our fairs to do that as well. If your local fair, has their nominated students that can come back and say why it was worth it to them to apply. I think that's huge. So definitely encourage more teachers to utilize that base as well. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
I think we're done with questions from the chat. I'm going to go just one thing that I wanted to share before we wrap up is that resources page I was mentioning on our website. So let me share my screen really quick. And Nora, maybe you can pop in the URL to this page in the chat. But this is our webpage on our site specifically for middle school educators from if you're just getting started and don't know where to begin with research projects for your students to, more resources specifically for the application. We hope this is um, a good compilation of different resources for you to utilize. Like I said, we have educational resources for the STEM classroom here. Um, a great place to start if you don't know where to begin with kind of that project ideation or just kind of getting a feel for your students about what projects make it to the competition or get nominated is looking at our past project showcases. Um, One thing that I think is uh, that we want to myth bust, so to speak, is that, a student has to have access to a fancy lab and have all these mentors to make it far. And sure, some of those students are the ones that get selected as finalists. Um, but that's not, 100% of the students at all. A lot of our middle school projects are truly homegrown. I like to think of a past finalist a couple years ago. His project was what is the best whipped cream nozzle that gets the best whipped cream out of the can. And that he's a top 30 finalist. He did a great project on it, and it came just from a place of his own interest. And that's what we really see kind of can make it really far, just having that passion for something, for a question, and carrying it through really well, can be a top winning project. So again, we have our Science News Explorers here, research at home for students that, again, don't have access to even school labs. There's ideas for them to start, planners and worksheets and things like that for you to utilize. Then more specifically about the application. We have our rules. Like I mentioned, we have the PDF of the application that you can just get a quick glance of what all the specific questions are, and that science fair paperwork guide here to help your students kind of go, or to help you as teachers really understand what your students will need to um, do for certain types of projects. If you don't have affiliated fair. And I'm glad that John mentioned the advocate program. We at the Society for Science do have resources for you all as teachers. Because again, we know you're such a big player in getting the students on board into STEM and really helping them continue those passions. So we have a middle school research teachers conference. That lottery is actually open now for the conference that will be held in October. Highly recommend you checking that out. Just going online and entering if you can take that time in October to travel down here to DC for that 3-day conference. And our advocate program, the application cycle just completed. The next one will happen in January of 2026. But you can learn more about this program. And really, these resources are just to help teachers in your positions starting research programs, getting their students, um, if you're already doing research programs, to compete and to take their projects further. So hope you find those useful. All right. Well, that about concludes our webinar. Thank you again, everyone, so much for joining. Thank you so much, John, for coming on and sharing your words of wisdom. It's always so helpful, again, always utilizing our alumni or teacher alumni to just be that voice to share your experience with teachers that are there in support, doing the same work, supporting their students through the application. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So until next time, we hope we will share more resources um, for you all before the application deadline, for your students as well. So please stay tuned for our emails. And thanks again. If you have any other questions, always you can email us at jic@societyforscience.org, and we will be happy to help you out. So take care. Good night, everyone. All right. We are done. We're offline.